Does dispensationalism give priority to the Old Testament? Sometimes people will accuse dispensationalism of putting too much of a priority on the Old Testament, but does dispensationalism teach Old Testament priority? Actually, dispensationalism teaches what can be called passage priority. And passage priority simply means that the meaning of any passage is found within that passage itself. In other words, if we are reading a New Testament passage, the immediate context of that passage will be the most decisive factor in determining the authorial intent of the writer. Similarly, if we are in the Old Testament prophets, the meaning of that prophet is found in that very text. The recipients of Isaiah, for example, did not need to wait until the New Testament to understand what God wanted them to know through Isaiah's prophecy. One reason that dispensationalists are often accused of Old Testament priority is because covenant theologians often explicitly affirm New Testament priority. This hermeneutical belief is based on the assumption that the New Testament should be the paradigm through which we read the Old Testament. In contrast to this dubious practice of New Testament priority, dispensationalism teaches that, one, the New Testament can give further information, but it cannot change the meaning of an Old Testament text. And two, if we require the New Testament before we can understand the Old Testament, then we've created a canon within a canon, which seems to suggest that the Old Testament is less important or less valuable than the New Testament. At the end of the day, in contrast to many non-dispensational approaches, dispensationalism rejects any sort of prioritization of texts which might function as a paradigm through which we read other texts. Dispensationalism teaches that the meaning of each text is found primarily within that specific text, and we call that viewpoint passage priority.